those attacks on Jews in New York is not isolated incidents, but part of a national scourge that has to be confronted, and not just by putting policemen in front of synagogues.
You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com, where we have our first show after the Likud primary that Netanyahu won so easily. And he is now again fighting for his political life, this time against the legal establishment who he thinks is trying to bring him down. And when Netanyahu talks against the legal establishment, he sounds kind of similar to another leader around the world, to his good friend, the President of the United States. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, he had a big Likud Hanukkah party where he spoke very similarly to the President of the United States, where they had people standing in back of him, young people, smiling and clapping like the President of the United States. He had pieces of paper, posters with slogans that were similar to the slogans of Donald Trump. And he seemed to be copying a lot, but he doesn't have the immunity that the President of the United States from prosecution has. And so I wanted to reflect on this on the show today with the expert on both American politics and Israeli politics, and also the U.S.-Israel relationship, the man who wrote the most interesting and longest book on this subject, former member of Knesset and former deputy minister, Michael Oren. Michael, thank you for coming on Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com.
Great pleasure to be with you, Gil.
So, are they Siamese twins, Donald Trump and Netanyahu?
You may have noticed, Gil, someone who covers politics in this country for a long time, that since the advent of the Trump administration, Netanyahu has gone from wearing blue and striped ties to red ties. And people around him are wearing red ties. And I can tell you from experience, I don't remember prior to 2016 the Prime Minister having a red tie in his wardrobe. So note that, along with the other comparisons you did note. There are many, many similarities. And certainly both leaders are taking pages from one another's, rule books. But there are great differences between the United States and Israel. The United States society is a very divided society. It can be a very weak society, and with an elite which may be resistant to even defending that society. But America has very strong institutions. Those institutions are grounded in the Constitution. The Constitution is grounded in 800 years of democratic thought. Israel, by contrast, is a very strong society. I can't imagine another society in the world sustaining the type of aggression, the rocket attacks, the terror that Israel sustains and remains highly functional. But our institutions are weak, and our institutions are not grounded in a constitution. They are not the product of 800 years of democratic thought. And in this conflict between institutions, the judiciary, the police, the Attorney General's office, and the Prime Minister is putting his money on the public, on Israeli society, to overwhelm that. And that's going to come down to the big debate in Knesset about whether a majority vote in Knesset can override the judiciary. And understand that what's at stake here is basically the very spirit and essence of Israeli democracy, because one of the pillars of democracy throughout the world is judicial review, that the final word is with the judges and not with the Knesset. And that's how the judiciary prevents the emergence of a tyranny of the majority, if you will, because the justice system actually exists to protect the minority, not the majority. And that's going to be put to the test, and put to the test apparently in the next few weeks. And what we're going to witness possibly is the victory of society over those institutions. I do not believe that the President of the United States has that ability, even with the support that he has, to override American institutions.
And Netanyahu might.
May well. And I can tell you, having served in previous Knesset, now it's 3 Knessets ago, from 2015 to 2019, is that had it been brought to a vote even then, the law, which doesn't translate well into English, but the law of overcoming a verdict of the Supreme Court law, probably would have passed. And I was probably, along with Benny Begin, the only member of the coalition to oppose that and to oppose it forcibly, because both Benny and I understood that what at stake here was the very spirit and basis of Israeli democracy.
Now, Netanyahu, do you see him being able to get a majority that would allow him to get immunity and pass this Supreme Court override bill? Can he overcome all these challenges and be able to stay in power?
Well, one thing I've learned about working with and under Benjamin Netanyahu is never underestimate him and never to eulogize him prematurely, ever. And I think that if he's going to make this move, and for him, of course, it's an existential move. It's not just winning an election. It's staying out of prison. I would not put it past him to be able to do this.
You see this third election being the one that finally ends up giving us a government that could function and actually get things done after more than a year of a political stalemate?
Well, here I have to fall back on the three words that no interviewee ever wants to say, certainly a recording, and that is, I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. And anybody who thought that they knew in the previous two rounds proved to be false. I don't know, and I don't know whether Benny Gantz will be held to account for having turned down President Rivlin's, to my mind, very fair offer, a compromise offer that would have made Benny Gantz a prime minister within a year. And my guess is that once he became prime minister, people would have forgotten how he became prime minister and would have created himself as a national leader. But be that said, I don't know whether the Israeli public is going to fault him for that, or whether the Israeli public will say about Netanyahu, enough. We've had it with these indictments. We've had it with these, all the reports about his family and everything about Netanyahu. Nobody knows.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
That's true. That we can hope. We can't know.
And hope for what? Do we hope for any government? I mean, I had long thought, Gil, and I used to talk to you about this, I think, in Knesset, that the Trump administration would table its peace plan. And that peace plan would serve as sort of a glue for these two competing parties, blue and white and Likud, to rally around a peace plan which would have been the best peace plan we've ever received and probably ever will receive in the future. And not to make no pun intended, but the desire, the vision of peace between Israel and the Palestinians always trumps divisions in the political camps.
Maybe if you would have presented it a few months before. If you would have presented before the Knesset was dispersed a year ago this week, then maybe it would have already been that glue and prevented this whole mess from happening. I'll tell you a story you won't believe.
Almost 2 years ago, when the administration was preparing its peace plan, I said to members that represented the administration, well, you better table it in the summer of 2018 between Ramadan and the Jewish holidays, because come September, we're probably going to elections, which would then bring us up to the spring. And who knows, maybe they won't be able to form a coalition government. And then we'd have to go to another round of elections, which would bring us into the fall, by which time the United States is in its 2020 electoral cycle. And who knows? And who would have believed, Gil, that wild prediction would have proved true? And they didn't table the peace plan. I think it was a mistake. I thought maybe they should have tabled the peace plan between the end of the elections and the formation of a coalition, and then it could have served, the peace plan could have served as a glue. For whatever reason, the administration did not do that.
Now, we've also talked in the past at length about whether Netanyahu, being so closely affiliated with Donald Trump, turns off too many left-wing progressive American Jews. And now he's aligned himself even further with him when you have an American election coming up where a Democrat could actually be elected and have some kind of boomerang effect against Israel, no matter who it is. How worried should we be?
I think we should be worried because in the nature of things, Democrats will one day return not only to control both houses of Congress, but control the White House. And my concern is not that we've shown too much gratitude to the Trump administration, because this is the friendliest administration we have known since 1948. No question about that. We have no Secretary of State who's against us, no Secretary of Defense who's against us. Across the board, pro-Israel, and they've done very significant things for the state of Israel, Jerusalem, the Golan, and the Iran issue. And I think the Iran issue is the most important of them, most substantive of them. Having said that, I think we have to spend much more energy and resources in reaching out to the Democratic Party and assuring them that, first of all, that Israel remains, and it's interesting, remaining a bipartisan issue. it's going to be crucial, and I'm very disturbed by some of the remarks by some of the leading Democratic presidential candidates. I fear what that debate over the Democratic platform will look like, because I remember the fracas around the 2012 Democratic platform. The screams, basically to boycott Israel it was very disturbing.
Which happened while you were there as the ambassador.
I was there at the time of the ambassador. It was very disturbing, and this is now 8 years later, and it's going to be much more contentious. The Israel part of that platform and the Palestinian part of the platform. I imagine it's going to be very problematic for us. There are two schools of thought about this in Israeli governments. One says that that America is our ally par excellence, and we have a strategic interest in preserving that bipartisan support as much as possible. Therefore, we have to do everything to reach out to ensure that support will be maintained. The other school says it's too late, that the Democrats, the progressive, have undergone historical processes that are beyond our control, and that if we have resources, we should invest them in strengthening our base, whether it be an evangelical base or an Orthodox Jewish base, but strengthening our base and move on. And, clearly I belong to the first school, but I can say that there's an increasing number of Israeli decision makers who either publicly or privately adhere or subscribe to the second school. And therein lies a great challenge for Israel's future relationship with the United States.
Before we go to the break, and after the break, we'll be speaking about what's going on with the anti-Semitism in the United States. One last question related to what you just said. Can you offer any personal insights from your experience with any of these Democratic candidates that could maybe make us think that we'll be okay with them winning? Did you teach any of them properly about Israel in a way that we don't know about, so they'd be more knowledgeable and ready to be president of the United States and have to deal with Israel?
I know several of them, actually more than several of them personally. I've worked with them. And without endorsing any of them, I could say that I've known Amy Klobuchar for years, and she's got, as they say, Israel in her heart. Joe Biden I worked with for years. He has Israel deeply in his heart. It's not like all Democrats, all progressives are sort of innately or even genetically predisposed not to like us. It's not true. But again, we could do a better job of explaining ourselves to these Democrats, to reaching out. I know personally, whenever AIPAC brings a progressive mission to Israel, I immediately clear my schedule and go out to meet them, because I think that's a very important investment of my time, even though I'm not in office now, just to show these progressives that Israel is a very liberal country, in many ways a more liberal country than the United States of America. And that's a case which we have to make, I believe, more compellingly and penetrate more deeply into the Democratic ranks.
We're speaking to Michael Oren, the author of the book Ally, about the U.S.-Israel relationship. You should definitely read that book if you want to understand it better. And after the break, we will speak to him about the anti-Semitism going on in the United States, unfortunately, right now. Stay with us.
Who are we as a people? Who are we as a nation? What does it mean to be a Jew in the land of Israel, as a Jew in Judea? What is our message to the world? We're finally back in our land, and we get to ask these questions.
Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to make Judea and Samaria an issue for the entire world, to know that the Jews have a place in the world.
Israel Inspired with Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we're back here on Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network, on thelandofisrael.com, where we are speaking to Israel's former ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, former deputy minister, former member of Knesset, and also the author of the ultimate book on the U.S.-Israel relationship, Ally, that I encourage you to read. And also the piece, what's the longer one, Michael?
Power, Faith, and Fantasy.
Power, Faith, and Fantasy. America and Israel?
No, America and the Middle East, 1776 to the present.
A wonderful book with the history going all the way back. Read that for everything that happened from before America was even founded until recently, an ally for what's going on when Michael was the ambassador in the United States, and then a little bit since then as well. So is this the worst situation for American Jews ever, as people are saying, or are people exaggerating?
It's not good, but it's not the worst. My parents grew up in the 1930s, and when Father Coughlin came on the radio, they had to lock their doors and go inside.
Oh no!
And there was an American Nazi Party, and there was Henry Ford, and major anti-Semitism in the United States. And there was a Roosevelt administration which received the highest percentage of any of the American Jewish of any American president. 94% of American Jews voted for President Roosevelt, and he did nothing to save European Jewry. In fact, closed the gates to the refugees from the Holocaust. So American Jewry has been in worse situations before, but that is in no way meant to diminish the severity and indeed the fright, the scare of what's going on right now. Very disturbing. It's interesting, Gil, you mentioned this book, the Ally book. In the early chapters, I talked about growing up as the only Jewish kid in a Catholic neighborhood, and the anti-Semitism I experienced there. Then I was a Christ killer. And then it talks about how I worked in construction through high school and college, and among the people I worked with in construction, the Jews were money grubbers. And in college, the Jews were people who stole the college opportunities of New England WASPs, and on and on and on, all the different types of anti-Semitism I encountered. And one of the criticism I received on the book from American Jews at the time, it came out now 5 years ago, was what's anti-Semitism? We never experienced anti-Semitism. I don't believe American Jews reading that book today would have the same type of comments about it. They would say, even then there was anti-Semitism.
And it seems to be spiraling out of control. When the first things started happening, people were looking at them as isolated incidents. And now it's gotten to the point where Avigdor Lieberman says it's time for American Jews to get up and move here. Does that show a lack of understanding of American Jews, or is he the harbinger of more and more people saying that?
No, I think I would not subscribe to that attitude. I think American Jews are proud Americans, and they have to work with an American to make America safer for Jews, and to work with the necessary partners, and particularly law enforcement agencies, to ensure that American Jews can be safe. But the big problem facing American Jews is defining anti-Semitism, defining what they're up against. And, for example, unfortunately, one of the big sticking points is whether anti-Zionism constitutes anti-Semitism. Does someone who supports a boycott of Israel designed to destroy the state of Israel, is that anti-Semitic? If someone singles out Israel for censure and ignores the human rights violations of other countries like China, Turkey, there's an endless list here, is that anti-Semitic? Now, to my mind, of course, it's anti-Semitic, but that is not agreed across the board in the United States. So the great challenge there is to actually define anti-Semitism. Before you can fight something, you got to define it. And then understand, what are the degrees of threat here. In most recent weeks, we've experienced African-American anti-Semitism, mostly against Orthodox Jews in New York. But there's also right-wing anti-Semitism, white right-wing anti-Semitism, which is directed against synagogues in Conway and Pittsburgh and elsewhere. And there's left-wing anti-Semitism, which has come to dominate major American campuses, much of the progressive discourse in journalism and in the media. And it is metastasizing very, very fast. And to my mind, I'm very much focused on left-wing anti-Semitism because I see that generating an atmosphere that permits the other type of anti-Semitism to blossom.
What can be done to stop this trend from increasing and getting even worse?
Well, I think, first of all, defining anti-Semitism as racism, not just among Jews, but within American society as a whole, as a racism, and on a par with every other form of racism. Among, for example, one of the aspects of progressive left-wing anti-Semitism is saying that hatred of Jews is not really racism because Jews are white and they're privileged, and racism can only be really directed against people of color who do not have affluence and do not have power. And that has become, that has downgraded anti-Semitism as a form of racism. We have to restore anti-Semitism. to be an exact par with hatred of black people, hatred of Latino people, hatred of people of different sexual orientations, that type of racism. We've lost that battle. We have to regain that foothold, that definition. Extremely important. I have been an early supporter. About a month after I returned from the United States as ambassador, I published an article in Politico calling for federal legislation, congressional legislation, that would deny federal funding for academic programs that boycotted Israel. And this article, pardon me?
And is that what led to the Trump administration making the move that it did a couple of weeks ago? That
it led to 26 states adopting precisely that legislation. I began working with a number of congressmen. It's interesting. I put it in Politico for precisely that reason. Politico is the newspaper you want to put it in if you want congressmen to react to it, and they did. And that has now become a national movement of some 26 states adopting legislation that would deny funding, state funding, to academic programs that boycotted Israel. Now, I came up against a lot of criticism that I was denying free speech, and that this was a deeply illiberal approach, and I thoroughly reject that. People have the right and the ability to say whatever they want, to write whatever they want, but that does not mean that the American taxpayer has to pay for it. That's all it means. And my own experience on American campuses, I've taught at more than one, is that professors will think many times before losing or forfeiting their federal funding. And so this will have an immediate effect. Therefore, I applauded President Trump's presidential directive that began to restore anti-Semitism as a form of national racism on par with other forms of racism against nationalities and people of color and religion. I think it's a tool. Is it a perfect tool? It is not, but it is the beginning of a counterattack. And I think that our beleaguered students and faculty members on American campuses need that type of support. So therefore, yes, I applauded it, and I do not believe it in any way curtails freedom of speech. People can say what they want; they're just not going to get federal funding for it.
Could there be an actual silver lining to all the horrible anti-Semitic acts going on, in that Jews are once again a minority, seen as a minority by the public, and at a time when being a minority, at a time of intersectionality, is seen as a positive that helps the image of these minorities? Can embracing our victimhood actually be something that helps students in the toughest college campuses for Jews right now?
It would be a shame if that were the case, because it would be much preferable to have reached that intersectionality and awareness without the suffering of these communities. But if that's the outcome, then it would be, I guess, a positive outcome, a deeper awareness. We have to see whether this attack in Muncie will be a turning point, where, first of all, attacks against Orthodox Jews in New York will now be seen for what they are, for anti-Semitic, racist acts, hate crimes. That hasn't been really the case over the past several months. But also seeing those attacks on Jews in New York as not isolated incidents, but part of a national scourge that has to be confronted, and confronted not just by putting policemen in front of synagogues. It has to be confronted in the classroom. It has to be confronted in the media. It has to be confronted on the legislative level. And so it's a multi-pronged counter effort, and which has to be coordinated. And again, they have to have a unified definition of what constitutes anti-Semitism in order for it to succeed.
I guess my last question would be, should Jews be bearing arms, reforming Jewish defense leagues, and being tough and standing up for themselves physically, as some are calling for?
Well, I think that the Jews have to defend themselves, whatever legal means are at their disposal, but that should not be a substitute for deep coordination with Jewish communities. And Jewish communities also have a protection defense league, a security wing, and very extensive cooperation with law enforcement in the United States. That's true. I said to you that I don't subscribe to the notion that because of anti-Semitism, Jews have to pick up and leave the United States. I do not subscribe to that in any way. But Israel, as the nation state of the Jewish people, as the Zionist enterprise, should always have open arms for those Jews who do seek to live here, and we should be prepared for the possibility of larger scale aliyah, whether from Europe or the United States. And I don't know if we're there. I know we were not prepared for the French aliyah, and if God forbid Corbyn had won in Great Britain, we may have been facing a larger scale British aliyah. Is the Jewish state still prepared to absorb large numbers of immigrants over a very short period of time? My experience as a member of the Knesset Committee on Absorption and Immigration was emphatically no, we're not ready. And we have to start thinking about that as well.
Thank you very much for your time, Michael, for coming here on Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com.
Code 2.
And listeners, thank you for being with us. If you want to have a very different point of view of a call for American Jews to get out now, then listen to Ari Abramowitz's show here on the same network. We are very proud of having a lot of different voices here on this Land of Israel network. And next week, we'll have more fun in Israeli politics. Thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful day from Jerusalem. Bye-bye.
The question is, why are the Jews there in the first place? The Jewish people have been yearning to return to their ancient homeland for a long time.
The Yishai Fleischer Show, the voice of a new generation of pro-Israel activists.
And there's only two kinds of minorities in the Middle East, armed or unarmed.
Inspiring minds to think differently.
That jihadism doesn't just attack Jews. It attacks Christians, and it mostly attacks Muslims.
Inspiration, spirituality, and politics.
So first and foremost, this country is here to defend Jewish people and to live in its ancestral homeland.
Listen to the Yishai Fleischer Show every week on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.